on. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm sure you all know what I'm going to say, which is, I'm so delighted to be here. But you know what? It is the truth for me. Unity, as Janice said, is very important in my life. It is my spiritual home, and you are my spiritual family. And I just love the way that we are always learning from each other. We learn when we're sharing our ideas, and it just means so much to be able to be somewhere where you can be yourself and share who you are and know that people are connected and it matters. And particularly this morning, it is my excitement and my pleasure to be talking about healing, because of course that is part of my everyday life outside of Unity. And yes, I do have a little bit of life outside Unity. I'm very fortunate in that my work and my spiritual life are linked, in that I am an intuitive craniosacral therapist. And what that means is that I work with people holistically. So I have people come from a wide range. Some come from doctors and dentists. Other people come from a sense of just feeling a bit out of sync with themselves. And what we do together is this really a return to love. It is a return to the wholeness and the essence that we are, because we know that that's really where healing comes from. And it's so fun to talk somewhere where I can actually talk about where healing really comes from, as opposed to thinking that it's all the modalities. And not that they don't have the gifts and the ways that can open a person to more healing, they do. But ultimately, it is being connected to our wholeness and being open to that healing that makes a difference. And a while ago, when I was working, what came to me was the thought that the body is in service to the soul. The body is in service to the soul. I had to think about that for a moment. You know, what did that really mean? And what I realized is that there were a lot of experiences and things that happen to the body, and we experience as being the person in the body, that are about our personal growth and change. And that really, that is what it's about, is we are here to grow and change, and we know that. But sometimes it feels like our body is doing the opposite, doesn't it? We feel like, oh, now what's wrong? And I wanted to share a few things, experiences that had me see that differently, for me to really see how the body is in service. One of them was a client of mine many years ago. She came with all this pressure and pain in her neck, and sometimes she couldn't even swallow. And so when she was laying on the table, and we were working away, and I had my hands on her, and I could feel like there was so much more in her throat. And I was thinking, wow, you know, this just isn't physical. So I asked her to kind of tune into her, to her throat area, and as she did, she could feel all this anger. And when we talked about it a bit more, she came to realize that she was angry. She was angry at her mother. She was angry at her mother for being a working mother. So though she was in her 20s, she felt like her mom was not there for her when she should have been. And she carried that in her throat, in her resentment. And when I spoke with her a bit about looking to see, well, you know, what might have been the benefit to the way your life was? And she goes, oh, there is no benefit. My mother should have been there. And I said, well, I understand that. But given that this is the way your life played out, what might be the benefit to that? So when we looked a little deeper, what she realized is she spent lots of time with her grandparents. And she loved her grandfather dearly, and he taught her all about animals, and her grandmother taught her about cooking, and they taught her about being a person of spirit. And slowly she could feel the softening. I could feel the softening under her hands as she realized that it was okay. That not only was it okay that the way her life had been, but that she wouldn't be who she was. That she wouldn't be doing the things she was doing if she hadn't had the childhood that her mother afforded her by working and doing things and letting her spend time with her grandparents. And that seems like a simple example, but really it's quite a metaphor for a lot of things. And the body's always communicating to us. And I had quite an experience of it myself about 20 years ago now, because I realized I was going to have a child. And I was all excited. I'd been married 15 years, and now I was going to have this precious little baby. And by the next day I woke up, and I could hardly move my arm. And it was like so heavy, and I was like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with my arm? And you know, I do work with my arm up on people, kind of holding myself up. And sometimes it does stiff, but this was like really debilitating. So, you know, I call up one of my colleagues and I say, you know, can I come see you? My arm is seizing up, because of course it can't work. And I go there, and so she works on treats, and I think, okay, good. I go home, you know, it's feeling better. It's a little sore, but it's feeling better. You know, I wake up the next morning, I can't move my arm again. I'm like, wow, what is going on, right? And I was just like, oh, it was getting stiffer and stiffer, and I get it treated again the next day. And, you know, 2-3 times, it's not getting better. So I'm realizing there must be something more going on, because I realized that for my own clients. So I was thinking, what could this be about? So, you know, I went to Louise Hay, maybe some of you know that book, How to Heal Your Life, and I looked up shoulders. Well, no surprise, guess what it was about? Responsibility, right? And I was thinking, responsibility? Why would I be thinking that? You know? And here it was, you know, I was so worried about the responsibility of this little tiny baby that I had all this anxiety. And though the baby was this big, I was all the way, oh, what happens when he drives? And how will it happen? And where will he go? And, you know, will he go to school? Oh, all these thoughts. And I had worked myself into this sense of being worried about whether I could be responsible for this precious little child. And I didn't realize that until my shoulder showed me. And so it helped me come to peace about that. And the more I looked at it, my arm began to relax. And I did still need some treatment because it had become physical. But all we needed was one treatment, and away it went. And I was better. And so there is this real link between the physical body and our mind. And we know that because sometimes when we get anxious, don't we feel it in our stomach or our heart pounds? And we can use this as a way to help us grow and change. And sometimes it can be a little trickier. That was close proximity for me, right? That my shoulder and the news of becoming a new mother. But sometimes the route is very long. And that was the case for me when I was growing up. I was quite anxious. I was a high energy person, but I was quite anxious. And by the time I was in my 20s, I was diagnosed as a manic depressant, which of course now they call bipolar. And what that looked like for me, quite frankly, is I spent lots of time being busy, rushing around, being frantic, and then collapsing in exhaustion and depression. And I would swing from one side to the other, but I never really knew why. And so I went to get some help with that, and the psychiatrist gave me, you know, this medication. I was saying to him, well, don't you want to talk about my childhood? Because like, I had a pretty kind of tumultuous childhood. It's like, no, we'll just give you antidepressants. You know, lithium and that. And I remember thinking, I don't think that's really going to do this. I was on them for a short time, which helped hold me steady, and I could begin to look at the deeper reasons of why I might be feeling that way. And though there was lots of love at times in my family, there was also lots of challenge and upset. And I had experiences where that left me feeling less than whole, physical and sexual experiences, and I needed to deal with that. That was unresolved. that was running underneath everything, and it was running me. And until I went back and looked at that, there was going to be no peace. There was going to be no health and no wholeness. So I began to look at that, and during that time, I also discovered craniosacral therapy, which was very helpful for me because it helped deal with how physical it become, that franticness and the exhaustion. And there are 3 areas of the body, and if they're compressed, they can cause this androgynous depression, and I had that. So not only was the emotional, but I had some physical trauma from falls and car accidents that was creating this upset for me. So one of the reasons that I do the work is that it helped me greatly. And there is always, and any of you who have experienced that kind of depression, it's a very physical thing. You know, you think, well, if I could just get my thinking straight. And as we know here, that is an important piece. But it's not always easy, is it? Like, how do we get that place where this mind of ours is going all over the place? And I think sometimes being on the spiritual path can make it even harder. Because we know ultimately that we're whole and complete. We know that each and every one of us is precious, just like that little baby who is arriving. But how do we live there? How do we live from that day to day? That's the challenge, really. And I think that's where spiritual healing comes from. Because that's when we can work with our minds and lift up into a vibration of that wholeness. And I say lift up, but it's kind of a bit of both, because we're kind of going within, because we are that love and light in ourselves. But the vibration itself is a lifting up. We know from quantum physics now that we're made up of light. And those of us who are on the spiritual path goes, we knew that, right? Science is finally catching up with us. But we literally are made of photons. And when our body is healthy and strong, it is vibrating. And we'll even use that in our language. We'll say, oh, you know, I feel good today. I feel vibrant. Or you think, that person is so bright or vibrant. Or I feel light. I feel good. And on the other side, we'll use the languaging of, I feel heavy, I feel thick, dark, lost, confused, right? We use those words because it is how we feel. And quite literally, the vibration is lower in your body. And particularly, like let's say you have something going on with your hip, the vibration is lower in that area. And we look to bring that vibration back up here is part of what brings health and vitality to that area. So we're looking at it on all levels. And this is where we can use our spiritual practices that we have, not only for peace of mind, but for physical health. And Myrtle Fillmore, who, as you know, was one of our founders, was very clear on this. This is how she brought health back to her body. She healed herself of tuberculosis. And partly how she did that is she spent time, a lot of time, actually tuning into the body and honoring it for what it was. She would speak to her body. She would talk to it about not seeing it for the truth of who it was. She would apologize for not seeing its vibrance, for not taking care of it. And then she would move into these affirmative statements, which later became affirmative prayer. And we can do that too. And I wanted to take some time today to do that. So in a little later, when we do our meditation, if it's all right with you, we'll do a slightly longer meditation. Is that all right? Because we'll do a healing. will actually go into that. And you know, I really resisted this word healing when I first started doing cranial sacral, because to me that meant if you were healed, you had no problems, right? Everything was fixed. But really, healing is a process. And we're always healing. We're always growing. We're always changing. And there is a way of using our spiritual practices to do that. So this is how Myrtle holds it, and I think it's a valuable thing that she has to share here. She says, when you truly go to the Christ within yourself, instead of to your own thoughts, you will receive whatever you need. And unless you heed instruction, drop the unwise things that you've been insisting upon, and begin to think of God in you and about you as the total fullness of every good. You must direct your prayers up, not up into the skies, but up into the God consciousness. Then you will speedily dissolve the old errors, beliefs, and their counterparts that manifest in the world. Isn't that clear? Mm-hmm. And it is about raising up into that vibration where we are basically have our thoughts and our feelings in that current